I think it's very fair to say that 2019 was a tale of two seasons for the Atlanta Falcons. The first half of the year was, in large part, a train wreck. Absolute train wreck. Especially once you had Keanu Neal go down very early in the season with his injury again. The defense was just getting shredded like Swiss cheese. Offense tried as might, tried to keep this team in games, but it just wasn't working. So you're halfway through the season, they were 1-7. And you're thinking, okay, this team's cruising towards a top 5 pick. This team's potentially looking at firing Dan Quinn, and he might not even survive the season. It was that bad. And all of that combined with the lack of balance and ineffective running game that they had, you just didn't really see any chance, any hope for it getting much better. But then the second half of the season was entirely different. The Falcons' defense turned it around at least a little bit. They started to play a little bit better. And Matt Ryan is still Matt Ryan. Julio Jones is still Julio Jones. Calvin Ridley is Calvin Ridley. And this team was pretty impressive the second half of the year. They really pulled it together. You look at the road victory against the 49ers late in the year, you could say, well, yeah, it happened at the last second. But they went into San Francisco, and they ended up beating the eventual NFC champs. That's not something to take lightly, especially for a team that started the season 1-7, for God's sakes. 6-2 in their last 8 games, which means you're talking about really, like I referenced earlier, a tale of two seasons. The first half of the season was train wreck. It was bad. It looks like you're tanking. Even though you're not trying to tank, you're just that bad. And then you figure it out, turn it around, and all of a sudden you start really building some momentum, get that taste out of your mouth from the first half of the year, even though it's too late to really put yourself in playoff position or anything. But now you're talking about this turnaround and whether or not it could potentially build you some momentum heading into the 2020 season. So in the offseason, this is a Falcons team is a little bit strapped under the salary cap, that's for sure. So they had to make some tough decisions and make some choices. They ended up losing Austin Hooper in free agency, which I don't think was a big surprise there. The market was going to be too good to him, and somebody was going to pay him more money than the Falcons were going to be able to reasonably afford. So instead, they tried to replace him by trading for former first-round pick Hayden Hurst, acquiring him from the Baltimore Ravens. You also saw some other notable names of the past gone from this defense, such as Desmond Trufant and Vic Beasley. On the offensive side of the ball, Devontae Freeman was not brought back. But they were still a little active in the offseason, bringing in Todd Gurley after he was released by the Rams, and Dante Fowler bringing him in after his time with the Rams. So there were some moves made, to be fair. One of the big moves they hope happens is the return to health of Keanu Neal, and actually being able to get him for maybe more than 2 or 3 games in a season would certainly be nice for them, I'm sure. Now, when you look at what happened in the NFL draft, for a team like the Falcons, kind of in this awkward middle-of-the-road type of place where they're not truly terrible, but they're not good enough to really, truly contend, you have to go to the draft, and you're hoping you can find guys that can make immediate impact in a hurry and make big-time impact. That's the type of position that they're in. That said, though, we'll see whether an A.J. Terrell or a Marlon Davidson makes any type of immediate impact on the defense, because they're going to need them to, that is for sure. They drafted Matt Hennessy on the offensive line, and I believe he'll be starting inside for them. It's a team that has invested quite heavily in recent years on the offensive line, which, when you've got Matt Ryan, certainly makes sense. And speaking of Matt Ryan, when you think of reasons for optimism if you're a Falcons fan, I just want to take a moment or two to talk about Matty Ice here a little bit, because this is a guy that I just don't think gets his due, and I don't think gets the amount of respect that he really, truly deserves. If the Falcons actually held on to win that Super Bowl, if they actually held on to win that Super Bowl, I think the entire trajectory of the narrative about Matt Ryan changes, and we're probably counting down the days till he's in Canton. And that's unfortunate that one game like that could potentially define him. But it might. But here's a guy in Matt Ryan that coming out of Boston College in that 2008 draft. I think about how stupid sometimes teams are. You had 2 Longs taken ahead of him, if you remember. It was Jake Long going number 1 to the Dolphins and Chris Long going number 2 to the Rams. And there's Matt Ryan sitting there at number 3. And the Atlanta Falcons coming off of that dumpster fire of a 2007 season where didn't they go 3-13? And you're talking about That was the year that the whole shitstorm started with Michael Vick and the dogfighting. So the guy that had been face of the franchise for the previous half decade is no longer in the fold. What the hell are you going to do? And Matt Ryan gets drafted into that situation. And a lot of people had a lot to say about that back then, almost over a decade ago now. Mike Mayock was getting a lot of crap. Oh, he's a BC guy, so he's just pumping up the BC guy. He's friends with the Ryan family, so of course he thinks he's going to be a great NFL quarterback. You had Steve Young sitting there trying to defend the pick and say, this is exactly the right guy to take at the right moment in time because this organization needs a face of the franchise. And what better way to move on from Michael Vick than Matt Ryan? And it's fascinating, a lot of other people disagreed, and a lot of other people looked at Matt Ryan and said, I don't think he's that dude. And he's been that dude. He came into the league as a rookie under your new head coach Mike Smith, and they made the playoffs, if you remember, in 2008. And they've been to NFC Championship games, made a Super Bowl appearance, several playoff appearances. It's not the sexy guy necessarily in the room to talk about, but you look at Matt Ryan and you say, this guy's been really good. His numbers are obviously pretty good. And he certainly doesn't seem like he's slowing down or getting worse. Now, it helps when you talk about reason for optimism for this team. Not only do you have a legit, real-deal franchise quarterback in Matt Ryan still in the peak of his career, but you got Julio Jones on one side and Calvin Ridley on the other side. Sure, it sucks to lose Austin Hooper at tight end, but you got a couple of studs on the outside, and Julio, one of those true elite wide receivers in the National Football League. Calvin Ridley, still coming into his own, but certainly a great number 2 option in that passing game. So this is a team that you would expect will still be able to make big plays happen in the passing game, be able to consistently move the ball through the air. And you combine that with the fact that this is a team that did perform much better in the second half of the 2019 season. You're hoping that the investment over the years of first and second round picks you've put into that offensive line will really start to pay off. Like you get Caleb McGarry for a whole year. Chris Lindstrom plays better. Jake Matthews on the left side. Now you talk about Matt Hennessy. You've invested a lot into that offensive line, and you hope that it will start to pay some dividends here in 2020. But again, to the point, they're much better in the second half of the year, and sometimes that's just fool's gold. Sometimes that doesn't matter, and sometimes that type of thing can carry over to the next year. It absolutely, absolutely can. And what's really interesting to me about the Falcons when you talk about them and what happened in 2019, this is a team that went 4-2 in the division, including 3-0 against their divisional opponents. So they beat the Panthers, the Bucs, and the Saints all on the road. And while you can sit there and say, well, part of that was because it was when they were playing much better in the second half of the season is when they actually played those teams. Yeah, it's just kind of a fluky thing to me. Is typically if you go 4-2 in your division, a lot of times you're talking about a team that is at least really in the playoff mix, if not potentially winning that division, and that didn't happen. But it is something that you could take as an encouraging sign if you're a Falcons fan. It's something that you could take away and you could say, you know what? We got hope for this year. I just wonder how much hope you can really have, because what does Todd Gurley have left in the tank? Now, you can think about salary cap until it blows out your R's. But the reality is the Rams got rid of Todd Gurley for a reason. Is they don't think he's that level of dude anymore. And maybe some of that is because they didn't think he was that level of dude commensurate to what they were going to have to pay him. And that certainly makes sense. But you could have restructured the deal. You could have done something. You could have found a way if you really wanted to keep the dude that badly. And admittedly, I don't want to say he looked fully washed in 2019. I don't think that's totally fitting to say. But he certainly is not the same guy that you saw a couple of years ago. That is for sure. So what does he have left in the tank? How much of a true improvement is he going to represent over somebody like a Devontae Freeman in that Falcons running game? When I look at the defensive side of the ball, where is this pass rush going to come from? You can sit there and say, well, Vic Beasley going away wasn't exactly a great loss, and you think Dante Fowler is better? Maybe, but how much? This is a team that I look at him and I say, Tack McKinley, I loved him going out of UCLA. I just haven't seen much out of him. Where are they going to be able to get after the quarterback? And that really becomes a huge concern to me when you look at that secondary and how young that secondary is. Got lots of young guys there. And what happens, especially if Keanu O'Neal goes out with another significant injury this year? Then what the hell are you going to do? You're starting potentially a rookie and a second-year guy as your two corners. Those are the types of things that concern me for a team like this is, where are the impact players? Where are the difference makers? And you say maybe you still have a Deion Jones and a Keanu O'Neal if healthy, but that's a big if he's healthy. And Deion Jones, just how much impact does he truly make on that defense? I look at this team and I have some real reasons for concern. And it's kind of like one of these things of when you look at teams typically, everybody kind of has this window of opportunity. And for the Falcons, you have to wonder if that window of opportunity is closed. Now, last year, they rallied the second half of the year and they played a lot better, so I wouldn't be surprised to see some people thinking about them in a positive light here. But it's just something that strikes me about it to say, if they didn't upgrade the run game much, if they can't get to the opposing quarterback, if their secondary gets exposed and is vulnerable, like I could potentially see this season getting off to a bit of a rough start and starting off on a similar trend to what you saw in 2019. And then you start to wonder, are the players potentially going to lose the fire a little bit if they start off a little slow? Like, this is a Falcons team that's been through quite a bit the past few years. So, you start to wonder with Dan Quinn being on the hot seat is if they struggle early, is it going to be really hard for him to rally the troops? And is this going to kind of fall apart a little bit? I don't know if it truly fully falls apart, but I'm not that bullish on them. That's for sure. I'm just not feeling them. I think the Saints are better in the division, and I also think the Buccaneers have improved enough, and they are better in the division than them, surely. And I think Carolina's improved, even though I think the Falcons are a better team than that. So I think the Falcons are more of like a 7 to 8 win team, and you're probably looking at Dan Quinn being shown the door after the season is over.